On May 28, 2025, the peaceful alpine village of Blatten, tucked away in Switzerland's Landslide Valley in the territory of Valais, was struck by a catastrophic landslide. The disaster began high in Berhen's region, where part of a glacier gave way, sending a roaring torrent of rock, ice, and debris down the mountainside. Within moments, much of Blatten was buried beneath the avalanche. Fortunately, many residents had already been evacuated 9 days earlier, on May 19th, after authorities grew alarmed by the increasing instability in the surrounding slopes. Still, tragedy struck when a 64-year-old shepherd working outside the designated evacuation area lost his life. In the weeks leading up to the collapse, geologists had observed a troubling pattern of smaller rockfalls and slides tumbling towards the Birch Glacier. Each new fall added tremendous weight to the glacier's surface until, under the crushing load of millions of cubic meters of debris, it finally failed. Welcome to That's Life, I Swear. This podcast is about life's happenings in this world that conjure up such words as intriguing, frightening, life-changing, inspiring, and more. I'm Rick Barron, your host. That said, here's the rest of this story. Well, Switzerland is racing to rebuild Blatten, which was crushed by a glacier. It's the sign of the economic and emotional costs of a warming Europe. Now, the decision came swiftly, almost defiantly. Within days of watching their village disappear under an avalanche of ice, rock, and melted water, Swiss officials announced their intentions to rebuild Blatten. There would be no retreat from the mountains, no abandonment of the valley that families had called home for generations. The commitment was absolute, even as the glacier responsible for the destruction continued its slow, menacing crawl across the wreckage. As mentioned, on May 28, 2025, the Birch Glacier surrendered to the relentless physics of a warming planet. 30 seconds was all it took. The massive ice formation, destabilized by rising temperatures and thawing permafrost, broke free from its ancient landing and descended upon the village below. Houses that had sheltered families for centuries vanished in the blink of an eye. Farmland cultivated across generations disappeared beneath tons of debris. The Landslide Valley, a picture postcard example of alpine life, became a snapshot of climate change's capacity for sudden, overwhelming violence. Yet, even as residents processed the shock of losing everything, authorities were already sketching blueprints for resurrection. The new Blatten would rise somewhere in the same valley, positioning itself as a testament to Swiss determination and a very uncomfortable symbol of humanity's complicated relationship with a rapidly changing environment. Now, the price tag for this act of defiance? More than $100 million in public funds, with insurance settlements expected to contribute an additional $400 million toward reconstruction efforts. Now, the disaster that struck Blatten represents far more than a single village's misfortune. It stands as a crystallizing moment in Europe's ongoing confrontation with climate reality, a high-altitude preview of the financial burdens and existential questions that mountain communities across the continent will face in the coming decades. The Alps, those towering emblems of permanence and natural majesty, are transforming under the pressure of atmospheric warming at rates that have surprised even the scientists monitoring the changes. Before the collapse, Blatten supported roughly 300 residents, many belonging to families with roots in the valley stretching back hundreds of years. The village represented a living link to Switzerland's past, a place where the rhythms of agricultural life persisted alongside tourism operations. Many people embodied this continuity. Over many years, families had worked the land for generations and built a life that balanced traditional farming with modern hospitality, renting rooms to visitors drawn to the valley's magnificent beauty. The glacier's collapse erased many houses, extensive farm operations, and the guest accommodations that helped supplement people's income. The sense of belonging, repeated by virtually every displaced resident, helps explain the unwavering commitment to rebuilding. For Swiss officials and citizens alike, the question has never been whether to reconstruct Blatten, but how to do so while navigating the complex new realities that climate change has introduced to alpine life. The village's destruction forced a very uncomfortable reckoning. If communities abandon mountain settlements every time warming temperatures increase risk, much of Switzerland's inhabited territory would need to be evacuated. Franziska Beiner, who leads the Energy and Finance Department for Valais Territory, articulated the dilemma with characteristic Swiss pragmatism. She said, "We cannot say everyone needs to leave the places that are dangerous," she explained, "because then we need to leave the territory." Her department bears primary responsibility for orchestrating Blatten's reconstruction, a task that requires balancing political will and engineering capability. The science supporting these concerns have been building for decades. Research institutions throughout Switzerland have documented warming trends that outpace global averages by a factor of 2. The consequences manifest in multiple ways, each posing distinct challenges to alpine communities and the broader Swiss economy. Number 1, permafrost. That frozen substrate that essentially acts as an adhesive for mountainsides is thawing at elevations once thought permanently stable. As this natural cement melts, the frequency and severity of landslides and rockfalls increase, turning familiar territory into unpredictable hazard zones. Second, tourism, that economic pillar upon which so many alpine villages depend, faces its own climate-driven pressure. Ski resorts are experiencing shorter seasons and declining snow quality as warming temperatures push the reliable snowline higher up the mountains. While researchers predict that reduced snowpack will decrease avalanche risk in the coming decades, few Swiss citizens view this as an acceptable trade-off for the loss of winter sports revenue that helps sustain mountain economies. But no climate impact has struck the Alps with more dramatic force than glacier retreat. You see, between 1980 and 2016, Swiss glaciers shred more than 40% of their total ice volume. Think about that for a moment, will you? Then in just the 2 years spanning 2022 and 2023, another 10% disappeared. Now, similar patterns have played across Austria and France. In Valais alone, scientists now classify 80 glaciers as presenting tangible dangers to people or infrastructure. The Birch Glacier had presided over Blatten for as long as human memory extended in the valley. Residents lived their entire lives under its looming presence, an icy landmark that defined their visual landscape and shaped local identity. But observation teams have been tracking troubling signs. The glacier was receding. Permafrost above it was weakening. Rockfalls were adding weight and instability. When clear indicators of imminent collapse appeared last spring, officials acted decisively, evacuating the village days before disaster struck. Lars Gutsky, who operates a cable car system on the opposite side of the valley, had a front row seat to this catastrophe. He watched the glacier fragment and plunged downward, dragging portions of the mountain with it. The massive flow of ice and rock obliterated buildings in its direct path, then continued to the valley floor where it created an improvised dam across the river. Water backed up rapidly, forming an unplanned lake that inundated structures that had survived the initial impact. Now, the inventory of loss was quite comprehensive. 3 hotels that had hosted skiers and hikers through countless seasons was obliterated, gone. Ancient barns in the village's oldest quarters, structures that had weathered centuries of alpine weather, succumbed to forces they were never designed to resist. The public oven, where residents had gathered to bake bread, according to traditions passed down through generations, disappeared beneath the debris field. It was gone. Now, the human toll could have been catastrophic. Instead, thanks to the early warning system and prompt evacuation, only 1 person perished. These survivors, suddenly homeless, dispersed to neighboring villages. Some moved in with friends and family. Others accepted offers from strangers who made vacant vacationing properties available. But the village itself, at least as a concept and commitment, will not be lost. Swiss officials made that determination within a week of the collapse. The council, meeting in an emergency session, voted to proceed with reconstruction. By September of 2025, they had unveiled an ambitious timeline. A new Blatten would emerge within 5 years, with the first residents potentially moving into completed homes within 12 months. Financial resources began flowing almost immediately. Private donors, nonprofit organizations, and various government entities contributed approximately $75 million. The state committed roughly $125 million, and insurance companies faced obligations, how about that, totaling another $400 million. Before construction can begin in earnest, government experts must update their comprehensive danger mapping of the entire valley. These technical assessments evaluate risk from avalanches, rockfalls, floods, and other natural hazards that warming temperatures have made more frequent or severe. The glacier remnant still sprawled across the destroyed village site remains a very unpredictable variable in all calculations. Now, former residents who have returned to view the wreckage describe the experience as traumatic. The village remains submerged and buried, a landscape so transformed as to be nearly unrecognizable. Beyond emotional costs, the disaster has extracted economic penalties. Tourists to the valley in the summer suffered immensely, and projections for winter revenue in neighboring villages, where many former Blatten residents now work, look very pessimistic. Displaced families now face very difficult choices about whether to relocate to the new Blatten once it's materialized, or establish permanent roots in the community that took them in. Leaving the mountains entirely remains a consideration for very few. Government support for Blatten's reconstruction has been robust. With limited exception, civic leaders across the political spectrum have endorsed the effort. The explanation offered repeatedly by sources throughout the valley and beyond centers on identity. Alpine life represents a defining element of Swiss national character, even for citizens whose daily lives unfold in major urban centers like Zurich or Geneva. The mountains are not merely geography, they constitute cultural bedrock. People's willingness to subsidize mountain communities through the tax system reflects widespread Swiss sentiment. As warming temperatures continue reshaping risk profiles throughout mountainous regions, difficult lines will need to be drawn. Some areas will have to be declared, no, it just cannot be rebuilt. That theoretical boundary has been reached in Blatten's case. The commitment to reconstruction proceeds with remarkable speed and financial backing. Yet the underlying tension remains unresolved. How many times can communities rebuild in locations where climate change is steadily increasing danger? How much public money should be directed towards settlements that face reoccurring disasters? At what point does resilience become denial? A spirit of determined reconstruction, echoed throughout the valley, drives the rebuilding effort forward. Officials speak confidently about timelines and budgets. Engineers work to identify safe building sites while acknowledging the complexity of their task. Residents make plans for returning to a valley that will look dramatically different, but feel, they hope, essentially the same. Yet the stark realities of climate change shadow every discussion, every decision, every blueprint. The Birch Glacier, even in its diminished and fragmented state, continues to loom over the valley as both physical presence and metaphor. It serves as a reminder that the stability humans once took for granted in alpine environments no longer holds. The mountains are changing faster than anticipated in ways that confound traditional risk calculations. This tension between cultural and commitment to mountain life and the accelerating dangers that warming temperatures introduce defines not just Blatten's situation, but a broader challenge facing alpine communities throughout all of Europe. The determination to rebuild is genuine and deeply rooted. The financial commitment is substantial and broadly supported. The engineering expertise is sophisticated and continuously improving. But none of these factors can alter the fundamental route of climate change absent massive global efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The Alps will continue warming at rates exceeding global averages. Glaciers will continue retreating and destabilizing. Permafrost will continue thawing. The risk that prompted evacuation orders in Blatten will intensify in other valleys, other villages, other communities with equally deep roots and equally strong attachments to place. Blatten's story then becomes a case study in how societies navigate the collision between identity and environmental reality. The reconstruction effort proceeds with admirable determination and impressive speed. Within a few years, a new village will indeed rise in the valley, equipped with modern infrastructure and designed with a contemporary understanding of natural hazards. Families will return, and life will resume in some approximation of its former patterns. But the glacier's remnants will remain nearby, melting steadily, shifting incrementally, a constant reminder that the bargain alpine communities have struck with nature has fundamentally changed. The old paradise, as it's called, cannot be rebuilt exactly. The new Blatten will exist in different relationship with its environment, once defined by heightened vigilance, sophisticated monitoring systems, and the sobering knowledge that the mountains are no longer the permanent, stable backdrop they appeared to be for centuries. But for now, the work continues. Plans advance, funds flow, engineers study topography and glaciology, residents make arrangements. The mountains, indifferent to human determination, continue their slow transformation. And somewhere in the valley where Blatten once stood, a new village begins to take shape, an act of faith and defiance in equal measure. So what can we learn from this story? What's the takeaway? The Blatten disaster is a very sobering reminder that our relationship with nature is not one of control, but coexistence. We can monitor, protect, and prepare, but we can never dominate the Earth's forces. The challenge ahead is learning to live wisely within those boundaries. Well, there you go, my friends. That's life, I swear. For further information regarding the material covered in this episode, I invite you to visit my website, which can be found on Apple Podcasts for show notes and the episode transcript. As always, I thank you for the privilege of you listening and your interest. Be sure to subscribe here or wherever you listen to podcasts so you don't miss an episode. And we'll see you soon.